Hello, this is Mr. Fredericks. Today we have a screencast on the European Air War. We're going to look at just a little piece of of World War II and the air war that was taking place. See what we can learn. So yes, all right, let's begin. Well, you can't talk about World War II without talking about World War One. In 1914 to 1918, the United States was involved in World War One, and the reason why this is relevant to our discussion today is this war made us sad. Not just sad, but very sad, apparently. We lost so many human beings. So many souls were lost in World War One. So many more than we were expecting, hoping, and certainly it created an element of regret for us. Now, if you look at other wars in U.S. history, yes, the Vietnam War had a lot of death, but it was nowhere near World War One, right? World War One was over 116,000 deaths. This war was unlike any other war in all of our history. It was entirely regrettable, and so many people died, more than any war ever. So at this point, that made us sad. It was a mistake. We regretted it. What did it solve anyway? There has to be a better way, was the consensus and the mentality of the US people. So during traditional warfare, the things that usually happen is you have a leader and another leader, and then one leader has an army and the other leader has an army, and they battle, and somebody can outmaneuver the other side and maybe try to get to the other leader, and that's how you win a war. But in that time, you basically have a massive amount of death between these two armies. And that is a very sad thing about war, particularly World War One. A lot of death. And if our future, because of the advancement in military technology, is just going to be more death at that scale, we have a terrible future ahead of us. And that's kind of what the fear of the US military was in the 1920s and 30s. But then, as of the 30s, we got a bunch of smart people, and we're going to end up nicknaming them as the Bomber Mafia. This is a group of people that very much thought that air war could end traditional wars and save a lot of lives. So it's going to be a lot of very smart people that very much were supporting bombers and whatnot, which is kind of a new technology at the time. Now, their solution was the future of wars won't be decided by navies or armies, but it's going to be decided by air war bombers. And as of the 1930s, the way that this would play out is you would have that king or the emperor that would send an army forward, and the other guy would send the army forward. But now one could send planes up and bomb the government of the other side, could actually go over that army and end the war before these two ever even have to fight. So the idea is that new bomber technology can actually end wars before everybody's dying. So the key is now these bombers will end wars and will save lives. Now the irony is not lost, that dropping an endless amount of bombs that blow things up and kill people is how we're going to save lives. But weirdly enough, that is what we were looking to do. So where did this idea come from? Well, in 1936, right around the time the bomber mafia and the leaders of the U.S. military were trying to figure out how to approach future wars, in a city by the name of Pittsburgh, it was raining a lot and there was flooding and the city flooded. Here's a picture of the Pittsburgh flood in that year, and it just everything's like covered with water. And there was one factory in particular that made springs. They made springs for propellers. Now, such a tiny little part of propellers, but in the end, that tiny little part is going to prevent propellers from being made, and that's going to prevent airplanes from being made. And in 1936, that one factory flooded. So without those springs, the United States and all across our country, with all the factories that made military planes, can't make military planes anymore. Every factory was shut down because of the lack of springs, because of this Pittsburgh rain and flood thing. So anyway, entire industry was shut down because of that spring. Now we're going to call the bomber mafia is going to call this a choke point, in economically speaking and military speaking. So the idea is that if you can get rid of one product that an enemy is producing that is absolutely necessary, you can shut down their full military production. So they're asking themselves, the bomber mafia, can bombing do this? Can we find choke points and shut down a war before it even gets started? And that's the idea. And it's going to basically, the new idea is going to be called precision bombing. The idea is that we're going to bomb with such accuracy that we're going to take out specific things that the enemy needs, and they'll have to surrender before all the killing between the armies. So the Nazi Empire, again, will find targets there, choke points, like, for instance, bridges, so they can't travel. That includes railroads, but also electricity. They can't operate without electricity. Aqueducts, if they can't get water, they can't function, right? And of course, their factories. If we can take out important factories, then the military production will have to stop, right? So we will identify these targets and we will bomb them, and then they will have to end the war. The war effort will collapse, and society will even collapse. If we take out enough factories, they won't be able to work, and we can win wars prior to most of the fighting. And that will save so many lives. We'll never see a war like World War I again. And that was the theory. No more horrific wars and death totals. Now, what plane did the bomber mafia want the US to use to accomplish this goal? Well, there are a bunch of different planes, but maybe the most popular, at least in Europe, was the B-17 bomber. And there was another called the B-24, but B-17 is what we're going to focus on today because it had the primary role. So it was nicknamed the Flying Fortress because the idea was we needed a plane that could be durable enough to fly all the way to Germany to hit these choke points, take a bunch of hits, and still keep flying. So it's going to be a big, tough plane with lots of armor. So big that it's going to be able to carry tons of bombs, which is the point, to bomb these factories and other choke points. And it's going to be so big that its fuel capacity is going to give it enough fuel to travel all the way to Germany and back, which at the time, most planes couldn't make it there all the way and back. So that's why the B-17 was so effective and necessary, because we could have a longer maximum range to fly and get back, which the B-17 could do. So what does the B-17 look like? Well, the flight crew had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, which would often double as the radiator, the guy on the radio as well, a bombardier, super important for our topic today, and then gunners to defend themselves from attacking fighter planes. And that's what the gunners looked like, little holes in the side with their machine guns. So the B-17s had to fly 25 missions in order to go home, which is going to be a problem because almost none of them are going to make it. It's going to get to a point where these all volunteer forces, because it was dangerous, about 20% of them were getting shot down or unable to complete their missions every mission. And if you do the math there, that means most people are making it somewhere between 5 and 7 missions, not actually making it to 25. And that's going to be a problem. But is precision bombing even possible? Though this was a new idea, the bomber mafia had a great idea, but can it actually work? And it is challenging because in the 1940s, bombing planes were having trouble hitting targets. If you can't hit targets, you can't hit them with precision and hit choke points. So let's get a little more specific, right? 3 reasons why planes couldn't hit their targets. Number 1, because these huge bomber planes would often get beat up by fighter planes. Now, fighter planes are quick and small, and therefore they can come up to bomber planes and go by them quick and hit them and shoot them down. So that is a fighter plane there. It's small, tiny, and quick, and that is like a B-17. As you can see, this smaller plane is going to be much faster, and it's going to be able to shoot down those other planes and attack them from the side, which there's minimal defenses, right? So many of those B-17s are going to get shot down by fighter planes, and that's one of the reasons we couldn't hit our targets well, why precision bombing wasn't working. Another reason was anti-aircraft defenses. So what every side did, but particularly the Germans, is they would take their cities where the choke points were located, right? And they would surround them with anti-aircraft weapons. And those anti-aircraft weapons would fire flak at the U.S. planes. If you can imagine hundreds of guns all firing at the same time, essentially like these big balls that would explode right next to our planes and send a flak or pieces of metal, like shrapnel, through the planes. It'd be like one bullet would turn into 1,000 bullets going in every direction, and so on. That could shoot these planes down. So a very dangerous flak. If you see here, all of those that the black smoke is that metal ball that anti-aircraft would fire at planes, sending them. And of course, you can see how many shots are going on at once. That's a pretty dangerous thing for a B-17 to fly through, right? So as you can see, this is flak there. It's all those explosions, and here's a plane getting shot down, right? So you can kind of see what flak looks like. So either way, besides flak and fighter planes, just timing, physics made it hard to hit our targets, even if we weren't being attacked. So it's not what like most people think. When a plane is bombing something, it doesn't just drop a bomb from directly above. That's not how it works. I wish it did work that way. It'd be easier, but it doesn't. If a plane drops a bomb while over a target, they are going to miss the target because gravity is going to keep that bomb going forward with the miles per hour that the plane was already going. So it's actually so much harder. You have to guess when to drop it ahead of time. So you have to drop the bomb long before you get there, which of course is a hard thing to do. But guessing when to drop it, now that is even harder. So let's talk about what goes into this guessing. Well, number 1, you have to calculate for your altitude, which can fluctuate depending on fighter planes and where you are, because depending on how high you are, you drop the bomb at different times. Number 2, plane speed. These planes will be going different miles per hour, hundreds of miles per hour, and that is going to impact when you drop the bomb, because that's how quickly the bomb will drop. Number 3, the wind. Wind is different at all times and at different altitudes, and you have to calculate for the wind or your bomb will be thrown off. Number 4, air temperature. The thickness of the air, particularly with the vapor and whatnot, will slow down the bomb falling and will also impact when you release the bomb. Curvature of the earth, you have to take that into account, the rotation of the earth. If you're unbelievably high miles up, that earth is moving, and that will impact where your bomb hits. You are also dealing with clouds, and that's going to mess with your perception of when to drop the bombs as well. So it sounds impossible, and it's going to be kind of impossible, but these pilots are going to try. So the solution of all of these difficulties about dropping bombs is going to be created by a guy named Carl Norden. And what Carl Norden does is he created a new invention, a very expensive invention called the Norden bomb sight. And how does it work? Well, the bombardier places it on a transparent piece of glass in the plane and looks down through the bomb sight. And what happens is then when they see the bombs through the bomb sight, that's when they drop it. And in theory, the Norden bomb sight will calculate for when it should be dropped. Now, how does that work exactly? Well, the bombardier is looking through, and they have to, ahead of time, program the conditions of the situation. Again, the altitude, the wind, the curvature of the earth, all of those things. It's actually 64 algorithms and 64 settings that they have to make. And in theory, the bomb sight will then adjust, and when the bomber sees the target, will drop the bombs. And if they trust the Norden bomb sight, it will fix and adjust, and that's how you hit the targets. So that's how they did it. Now, with this bomb sight, that's what it's called. It's called pickle barrel bombing. What that means is basically the leaders of the Air Force were saying, we can drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 6 miles up. So that quote became kind of famous, and it was called pickle barrel bombing. Now, did we ever get to the point where we could 6 miles up drop a bomb that precisely? Absolutely not. But we're going to try. So the plan is in the European theater, we're going to attack the Nazis and with precision bombing to take away their ability to do war. So they would have to give up, right? Now the trade-off with precision bombing is you can't bomb at night, because if you bomb at night, you can't see the target. So you have to go during the day, and that's when the B-17s would go. But the problem is, if you at nighttime, you could, well, either way, there's a problem related to it, and the British are going to highlight it. So we're allied with the British, and they're going to bomb Germany at the same time. And the British said, Americans, you're stupid. You should bomb at night, not during the day. So the British point of view was that bombing at night allows you to hide your planes. The enemy can't see them. And if you can hide your planes, you can't be shot down. And if you can hide your planes, you can come in much lower and actually do significantly more accurate and destructive bombing of those cities than if you're dropping it 6 miles up. I mean, who knows what you're hitting, right? So you can miss by over a mile from that high up. So that's the point of view of the British. They should attack at night and so on and whatnot. But the Americans were like, you can't attack at night. You can't see your targets. You're just going to be dropping tons of bombs everywhere and anywhere. And the British were like, yeah, who cares? And the Americans were kind of like, no, you're going to be hitting homes, hospitals, schools, children. And the British were like, it's war, a total war. Those people are enemies. They support the Nazis. They've been the soldiers of the Nazis. They're working in the factories that supply the Nazis with everything they need. Who cares if we hit them? This is war. We need to end the war. And so the British plan, again, was called not precision bombing, but morale or area bombing. Area bombing and morale bombing. Some people even say carpet bombing. The idea is destroying everything to destroy the morale of the enemy. If you ultimately, kill enough women, children, men, grandparents, pets, you're going to make people so sad and upset that they're going to give up. Now, choke points, no, you're not going to hit choke points. You're going to hit everything. That's the goal, is to basically burn down those cities with bombs. And the goal is to destroy so many lives that those people are going to be sad and give up. The goal is ultimately to take all those people that are working for the German economy and the war machine and basically get them so angry that they have a revolution and they get rid of their Nazi government and demand an end to the war. So the goal is to take those factories that are helping the war effort and destroy them. And then there'll be no products left for the people or the military, and they'll have to give up the war. So World War II will be ended. It will be finished. And morale bombing is the best way to do that. Just crush all of their souls, right? And this will end the war early and will save British lives. And that's their point of view. But the American point of view is like, morale bombing is wrong. It's wrong. You shouldn't be killing civilians. Civilians didn't start the war. It's only soldiers you should be destroying. Morale bombing is wrong. And so on. Civilians matter. You shouldn't be killing them. Now, the U.S. has its own plan, right? So the U.S. is going to bomb during the day, and the British are going to bomb at night, and we're going to bomb relentlessly the enemy. And that precision bombing is what we're doing. We're going after choke points. And by going in the day, we can see the targets, and that's what America's going to do. We've talked about this. Now, again, the trade-off is now our planes can be seen, and we're going to have to deal with more anti-aircraft weapons. And we're going to have to, and as you can see, that's the flak around the plane. But we're also going to have to deal with clouds, because the British going at night, they don't care when they release their bombs, because they just will blow up anything. Clouds don't matter, but clouds matter when you're doing precision bombing, and a lot of missions are going to have to turn back because of the weather. That's pretty inefficient. Also, by bombing during the day, as the Americans were, German fighter planes, those quick ones, are going to attack our bombers and absolutely crush us. So either way, we're doing this during the day, and the British are going at night. We're going to see whose system is better. From 41 to 43, what factories did the U.S. go after for our choke points? We went after like Jeep factories, plane factories, tank factories. But either way, in the entire length of this war, we're going to lose over 4,700 planes, B-17s, with 10 members each. That is such a massive amount of pilots that were being lost. Each mission, we lost like 20% of the mission. That's huge. These pilots were told they could go home after 25 missions, but they really were getting shot down every 5-6 missions. So we're kind of our leaders of our military force were like, this has to end. Precision bombing is not working. It's not good. So they tried to end it with even a little more precision bombing. They said, if we can knock out ball bearing plants, then that is how we're going to end this war. Now, if you're not an engineer and you don't know what a ball bearing is one of the simplest things there is. It's a bunch of round balls together, and anything that has an engine or moving parts. One of the ways that the parts of the engine move is through ball bearings. Those balls, it's difficult to explain, but can be moved, and that allows parts to move. And ball bearings are often used for the simplest things. You can't have tanks move without ball bearings, a bicycle, a Jeep. You can have a $10 million tank, but if you don't have ball bearings, which cost like 8 cents, then that tank's not going to be able to move. It's going to be useless. So ball bearings are absolutely important. So on October 14th, 1943, we're going to nickname this Black Thursday. We sent over 291 B-17s to go attack the ball bearing plants, which were all located in the same place, a town called Schleswig. I can't speak German that well. So we're going to go in there with 8 to 9 bombs each, with all of those planes. Over 1,000 bombs are going to drop. If we can just hit those factories and get rid of the ball bearings, not Braintree, but Germany will shut down. Their war machine will shut down. Nothing will work. So the Norden bomb site was being used by all these planes, and it didn't. Ultimately, out of all of those bombs, over 1,000, we only had 88 confirmed hits. We did not take out those factories. We damaged them a little bit. What are the costs? We got 60 planes shot down. That's 600 of our troops gone, dead or imprisoned. And in 1943, the leader of the Air Force, a guy by the name of General Curtis LeMay, is the top guy in the Air Force at this point. It wasn't called the Air Force exactly. He's going to say, he's the one who has to write letters to every family of somebody who dies. And after that mission, going after the ball bearings, he had to write 600 letters to 600 different families. And he's like, this is not working. This is not okay. Precision bombing didn't accomplish the objective, yet all these people died. It's not okay. So ultimately, very sad with all those deaths. So he begins to change his mind. And by 1944, he decides the U.S. has been wrong with daylight precision bombing. We have to go a different way. We have to adopt the British technique of area morale bombing. So on February 13th, 14th, 15th of 1945, with now LeMay in total control of our bombing, they're going to start going after Germany big time. And there's a bunch of examples, but the most famous was Dresden, Germany. Well, anyway, it was the center of all the railroads of Germany at that time. So if you could take that out, Germany couldn't get around with whatever they needed. It was the communication center. Remember, there were no phones or satellites at this point, so you needed wires to communicate, and that's where a lot of the wires came together. And if Germany can't communicate with each other, they can't coordinate a defense or offense in their war. It had over 110 factories in Dresden, and that's over 50,000 workers going to work every day producing war goods. And if we can kind of hurt them, then we're hurting the effort. Just a few examples of those factories. There was a poisonous gas factory, an anti-aircraft factory, a component factory for airplanes. So another reason we wanted to hit Dresden is basically the Soviet Union was slowly moving towards Berlin and ready to invade Germany. And the best way to attack an enemy is, at the same time with a coordinated attack from different directions. And we thought if we bombed their major cities that were offering them supplies in the west, that would make it harder for them to defend in the east. And they were right about that. We wanted to create massive chaos, and we thought chaos would result in them surrendering. So our goal was to create a firestorm in Dresden. So on February 13, 1945, what we were doing was we wanted to turn Dresden into an absolutely burnt down city. So the first step was we needed to protect our bombers as they came to Dresden. So many B-17s were getting shot down at the beginning of the war, but that was because they were just flying up against German fighters, because our fighters couldn't go to there to protect them because they didn't have enough fuel. Remember, fighter planes are quick and they are lighter, but we made it a change. We basically found a way on our own fighter planes to put drop tanks, basically paper fuel tanks that are under the wings, yet they're not metal, so they're not too heavy, and they provide extra fuel that allow our fighters to make it all the way to Germany and back. Now our quick little fighters can defend our B-17s and dogfight with the enemy fighters, and now our B-17s are significantly more protected. You can see the drop tanks there carrying extra fuel. So that's going to allow all of our fighter planes to go all the way with the bombers to protect them. So now that those planes are protected, most part, second step was the first planes to go in and they drop what was called blockbuster bombs. These are massively huge bombs that are supposed to be huge, powerful explosions. You can see the blockbuster on the right there, that big one. Well, what they're supposed to do, these blockbusters, is they're supposed to carve really big holes in the streets. And we knew that the streets of Dresden was where their water pipes were. And if we could bust their water pipes, then they couldn't put out the fires that our fire bombs were going to do. And if your firebomb lights a fire, that's not that big of a deal. But the fire can spread. And if it's allowed to spread, one bomb can do the damage of 50 traditional bombs because it takes down an entire neighborhood. You just got to prevent the enemy from putting those fires out. And that's what the blockbuster bombs did. Now, in addition to that, the blockbuster bombs also would blow out all the windows within 400 yards. And what that would do is, with all that oxygen now rushing into those homes, the fires would be drawn into those homes, and now the homes would catch on fire. That's what was necessary to create a firestorm. Third step, we would actually drop the fire bombs. These are not traditional bombs. They're bombs with a massive amount of gelatized gasoline that would spread far and wide, and you couldn't easily put it out even by putting water on it. And these fire bombs would spread. It wouldn't just hit the local area. That fire would burn hot and spread, and that was the key weapon there to take out Dresden. So it's worse than that, actually, because when you have massive amount of fires, that's so much heat, and that heat goes up. But the thing is, when the heat goes up, that creates air pockets where the heat was. And according to the law of physics, you can't not have air there. So air has to rush in to fill that hot air that's going up. Well, where's there extra air? Well, it's above it, right? Because that's where the hot air is going. It's pushing that colder air down somewhere else, and the cold air now rushes in to fill that vacuum. Just physics, right? And when that air rushes down to cover that longer distance, that creates wind. Now, why does wind matter? Well, wind provides oxygen to fire, but in addition, it also spreads fire and creates a wave and spreads it sometimes faster than people can run. And fire waves would overtake people running away. They find themselves quickly surrounded and could not escape. But it's actually worse than that. So many people went down to the basements to protect themselves from the bombs. And ultimately, that air would be eaten up by all this fire, and people were found just suffocated in their basements in the ground. So oxygen would be lack of oxygen because of the firestorm would be one of the top ways that so many people would die. Now, all that wind would often suck people in and at hurricane speeds blow people into fires. So here's a couple quotes from people that were in Dresden. Suddenly I saw people again right in front of me. They scream and they gesticulate with their hands, and then to my utter horror and amazement, I see one after another. They simply seem to let themselves drop to the ground. Today I know that these unfortunate people were not the victims. People were the victims of lack of oxygen. The oxygen was eaten up by the fire. They fainted and then they burnt to cinders. So another quote from somebody different. To my left, I suddenly see a woman. I can see her to this day and she'll never forget it. She carries a bundle in her arms. It's a baby. She runs, she falls, and the child flies in an arc into the fire. Another person. It was dark and all of us tried to leave this cellar with inconceivable panic. Dead and dying people were trampled upon. Luggage was left or snatched up out of our hands by our rescuers. The basket with our twins covered with wet clothes was snatched up out of my mother's hand, and we were pushed upstairs by the people behind us. We saw the burning street, the falling ruins, and the terrible firestorm. My mother covered us with wet blankets and coats she found in the water tub. So it was so awful there to survive. You had to fill up your tub with water, dip your clothes in it just to prevent yourself from burning to death. Now, the outcome of these bombing campaigns, and it wasn't just Dresden, it was all over Germany, right? Cities were just annihilated, unbelievably destroyed, and awful, right? So 25,000 people were killed in Dresden. That's just Dresden. But if you look at this map, we firebombed and destroyed as many cities across Germany as possible to get them to surrender. And if you look, these pie charts show what percentage of the cities were burnt to the ground. And as you can see, particularly in the western part of Germany, it was a high percentage. We made their lives miserable. It wasn't an act of war. So now, was all that civilian death worth it? On May 8th, 1945, Germany did voluntarily surrender as the Russians came into their city. Was it because of the American bombing? That's a good question. Was it the fact, did we shorten the war because we took out communications, transportation, we took out war goods, civilian goods, destroyed their economies, civilian morale? It's difficult to tell. People argue to this day about the role of the air war on the surrender. Was it all worth it? The cost of the air campaign. 50 out of 54 German cities were crushed. 52,000 pilots and their crews were killed. I mean, that's difficult. 600,000 German lives were lost, mostly civilians, from all these bombings. 4.8 million housing units were destroyed. 13 million Germans were homeless after the war. So there's a huge cost. The arguments that support our bombing raids on them, did it shorten the war? And we don't know for sure. Technically, the Germans held on as long as possible until the Russians actually entered their city. Maybe the bombing made it a lot easier for the Russians to make it that far. It did save American lives. We bombed and killed so many of the Germans that it did weaken them, and that resulted in the war ending earlier probably, and American lives being saved. Some people said yes, that the Germans had misbehaved and acted terribly in this war, and the destruction that they faced would be a lesson to them and every other country of the world. This is what happens when you do this, and maybe that's going to prevent future wars. Arguments against all of this bombing. Number one, the war had already been won. It is true that the Allies knew we had won the war. It was just a matter of time until Germany surrendered. Did we really need to annihilate, hundreds of thousands of German lives and millions of homes? We knew they were going to surrender eventually, but and ultimately they did. Right? We were coming in from the west, the Russians from the east. Number two, we were hitting military targets, but we were also purposely now aiming for civilian targets as well. Is it acceptable to go after civilians to make a war end early? I mean, many of the Germans today say that those Allied bombings are the equivalent of a Holocaust, that the world condemns the German Holocaust. But what about the U.S. dropping so many bombs, purposely killing civilians and having them burned to death? Is that so much different from the Germany putting people in camps? And you could argue, yes, it is. And you can argue that some people are saying no. Just because we were further away and we did it from the sky and we did it with planes and technology does not make burning those people any better than what the Nazis did with the Jews and the Gypsies and the Slavic people. But again, that is a controversial discussion there that we need to have at another time. Number three, some people say that this bombing was a mistake. The war was going to end, and we knew we were going to have to occupy them, and we knew we were going to take care of them and have to feed these people. And the fact that we destroyed their lives so thoroughly, it was just a massive burden that we were going to have to take up after the war. And we are going to take up that burden. So we kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit. And again, as you know, after this war, we split Germany into 4 parts and we take care of it, right? So all of those people need to be taken care of with our money. Number 4, some would argue that morale bombing didn't work either. That for all the death and destruction we caused, that if you really study the psychology of the time, our hope was to upset those people so they would give up. But it was more that those people were angry at us and all our killing that we were doing. And the anger almost united them and said, we will never give up and we're going to stand behind the resistance. So in some ways, you could argue that morale bombing didn't make them give up and cause a revolution, and therefore that was bad. Now, what's the legacy of our bombing campaign across Germany and whatnot? Well, we're going to also use that. It's going to be so successful, we're also going to use it in the Pacific War, right? So this is just one example, but ultimately we're going to burn to the ground Tokyo. 100,000 people were killed. That was more than either atomic bomb that was dropped because we burnt that city to the bottom. If you look at Japan, these are all their major cities, and if you could read that slide a little more carefully, we ultimately burned just about every city in Japan to the ground, and that's going to be sad. So maybe not sad. That shortened that war and what was necessary. So our bombing campaign was followed there. But you just got to ask yourself: is it acceptable to kill so many civilians to enter a war? And a lot of people have different opinions. As of 2009, when President Barack Obama was president of the United States, he did sign an agreement with 114 other nations to ban firebombs. It's no longer acceptable to end a war early by burning cities to the ground and predominantly hitting civilians. Not acceptable. So that treaty would be signed. And I don't know, that's the direction we are now. So either way, this was a small little taste of the role of the air war in World War II and the use of the B-17 bombers. Tune in with us for other World War II topics. Thank you for paying attention and have a fabulous day.